Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. I hope you'll all check out the all-new Zibby Mag, ZIBBY-MAG, the literary lifestyle destination with essays, book news, a lit lifestyle feature, and even some classes. Check it out, zibbymag.com. Elaine Castillo is the author of How to Read Now, essays. Elaine was named 30 of the planet's most exciting young people by the Financial Times. She was born and raised in the Bay Area. Her debut novel, America Is Not the Heart, was a finalist for numerous prizes, including the Elle Big Book Award, the Center for Fiction Prize, and the Aspen Words Literary Prize, and was named a Best Book of 2018 by NPR, Real Simple, LitHub, the Boston Globe, San Francisco Chronicle, the New York Post, Crocus Reviews, and the New York Public Library. Welcome, Elaine. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss How to Read Now, essays.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a real joy to be here.
Oh, it's so fun. This is so interesting. There's so much here that I responded to. I have like 1 million dog-eared pages.
Oh.
Why don't you tell listeners a little about what this essay collection is about?
Sure. I mean, I think, it's at some point I was joking to someone. They were like, well, why did you write this book? And I think I said something along the lines of, well, it was either write this book or just leave literature entirely. I mean, it was just starting to, and I talk about it a little bit, especially in the author's note and in the intro, about the kind of events that led up to it. It really came out of, I mean, I wrote this mainly on book tour when I was on book tour for my first novel, it came out in 2018. And I started writing this. I was at it was like a period of time where I was at the Sydney Writers Festival and then the Auckland Writers Festival in like spring 2019. And by that point, I was already a year into tour, and I had sort of, you run the gauntlet of all of the kind of tour experiences. And it just started, the things that I was just seeing, the ways that writers of color were being framed in the kind of contemporary literary discourse. It just increasingly just started to seem impossible to ignore, impossible to just absorb. So then I was in New Zealand, and I mean, I talk about it a lot in the book because New Zealand, or Aotearoa, has such takes up a lot of space in the book, because I had a kind of altering or sort of transformative experience there in a way that I don't think I've really had before. And so it's that kind of somewhat epiphanic experience of being in a new place, and just started writing in a fugue state there, and here we are.
So what about that experience made you want to take pen to paper?
I mean, I think it's probably a combination of, you're so far from home, you're already losing it. I mean, the Writers' Festival circuit is it's such a wild thing anyway, because it takes people who are very used to just being alone, writing in rooms, and then suddenly is like, here, have sociality. That's going to go well. So, but actually, it did really go well. I met some of the writers and the friends now that I met there. We still are all in touch. We kind of jokingly call it like this class of spring 2019, because that experience, I think, was special for all of us. I think for me, recently I've been thinking a little bit about travel writing. I don't know. I think travel writing is such a fraught genre. Nowadays, I was saying this in another interview where I was talking about travel writing. I mean, obviously, there is the grand majority of travel writing, and the history of travel writing is ultimately one that's told by a white perspective about sort of the exotic land that now I'm writing back to my colleagues about, the Our Man in Havana, or wherever, or, you know, kind of fetishistic descriptions of like the Philippines and all the mangoes and all the people are so lovely, you know, that kind of writing. So, you know, I think I think like anyone, I have a kind of a trepidation around travel writing, and I was aware myself that the experiences that I was having, I was like, oh God, is this going to be just like Eat, Pray, Love vibes? What am I like, questioning myself about? But you know, I also, you know, there's also the subset of travel writing, like James Baldwin writing about Paris or writing about France or writing about Switzerland in ways that both write about the actual place, illuminate the place in maybe ways that I haven't, I hadn't read before, but also illuminate his own relationship to home. So I think that's really what captured me, is that in a way, the space, you know, I was taken with the specificity of Aotearoa, with its materiality, with learning about its colonial history, and with drawing the connections between the or seeing resonances between its history and the, you know, history of the Philippines, the colonial history of the Philippines, or the colonial history of the West, especially because, you know, like in New Zealand, I was hiking. I don't hike. I'm not a hiker. But then, of course, starting to do that, doing something that you would never do at home, it started getting me thinking about things like climate justice and nature, and of course, the, you know, the not just history, but the present of wildfires in California and how all of those. So you start to make kind of unexpected connections when you're taken out of your comfort zone, ultimately.
Wow. You know, one thing you did a lot in the book is talk about the zodiac signs and everything. Don't spit your coffee out. It was a near miss. The computer was getting about to get wet there.
That was dangerous.
Tell me about that. I loved that.
Okay. I only very recently got into zodiac signs. A friend of mine told me to download an astrology app, and prior to that, I was a skeptical person. I was like, ugh, stop trying to analyze your entire life through this framework. And I don't know, I must have downloaded at the perfect time in my life, because I've only been into it for the last 2 years, but now I realize, very typical Virgo, I've done now enough research that I could probably do a PhD about it. And I think, I mean, genuinely, well, one thing, I was joking to a friend of mine, a fellow queer friend of mine. I was like, there's a lot of zodiac signs in here because it's really just important for us to represent queer culture. And he was laughing about that. Which is, I mean, it's also true. But I think, well, for one thing, it's fun to me. It's delightful to me. But I think I also have recently realized, especially as someone who can be, I mean, my love language, as this book I'm sure will indicate, is like nonstop criticism. So that's how I tell you that I love you. So I think zodiac stuff or astrology really offers you a really useful language, because instead of just being like, oh, you're wrong about everything, you can just, it softens the blow to be like, oh, you're such an earth sign. And, you know, that, so it gave me this dialect to be able to critique my friends, or, you know, the people in my life, without being like, oh, you're doing everything wrong. They're like, yeah, we've heard that before.
Wow.
Wait, sorry, what sign are you?
Why don't you try to guess? Do you have any idea? I've known you for 3 minutes, so you know.
3 minutes. I mean, I'm bad at earth sign. I'm gonna go with earth sign.
How do I know if it's an earth sign? I know what it is.
Earth sign is a Virgo, Taurus, or Capricorn. Oh, okay. Well, now now I think I'm shooting. I think I should only get one guess.
I'm a Leo.
Oh, it's Leo season. Congratulations on Leo season.
Thank you. So what does that mean? Should I be leaping around in excitement?
I think isn't it a thing that almost all like Hollywood stars are Leos? Like, it's a very gregarious acting. I mean, this book is a Leo because it came out yesterday.
That's right. Congratulations.
I was just telling someone, I was like, this book is a Leo. And
that's so funny. I mean, yeah, that's really funny to give every book its own zodiac sign and all that. My kids and I are kind of like obsessed with this right now. I think that's why I was drawn to this small element of the whole bigger picture story. But they're literally on the way to camp this morning. You can go onto some zodiac app and it can tell you based on your sign and like maybe one other thing, how old you'll be when you meet your soulmate.
No.
Yeah.
Wait, I want to do
like
this.
One of my kids is going to meet one of my younger kids, they said 15, and another kid, they said 28. And I'm like, all right, okay, good. This is good to know. You know, we can like prepare ourselves for this.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Someone should do a listicle of books by their zodiac signs. Like,
Oh my gosh, I love that.
wouldn't that be funny? You'd be like this way, and then you would be like, because for example, I found out recently that Wong Kar-wai, the Hong Kong director that I talked about in the book, he's a Cancer. I was like, all of his movies are Cancer movies.
Wow.
So now it's like my grand operating, my, what is it, grand unified theory.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, if you post about it and I'll like share the reel and be like, see, this is what we're talking about. You can do all the research and I'll benefit from it because you have so much time too, you know. So there was also, I know we're joking around a lot, but there was there was a sad element with your dad and his health and his passing away and how that factored into reading and how reading got you through that and how reading, I completely relate to how reading can get us through different situations. Tell me a little more about that time of your life and, even the ectopic pregnancy or something. So I'm so sorry that happened. How have books sort of been the through line for you?
Yeah. I think it would have been impossible for me to write about reading or my reading life without talking about the person who introduced me to books. And that was my father. And he was the person who, he was such a huge reader himself, even though in his life, he didn't do anything that was related to, reading or literature or even the humanities, really. Humanities in terms of arts, by the time that I knew, by the time he was born in his California life, he was a security guard in his life in the Philippines long before I was born, because he was 54 when I was born. He was an orthopedic surgeon. So there was no, his love of books was this totally personal, idiosyncratic, not at all like academic relationship to it. And that because of that, he passed that down to me. So we were like reading across genres. He was never like, oh, you should read this because it's 18th century literature. It was like, well, you should read this because it's, Thomas Mann, or well, he's not 18th century, but, Thomas Mann, or you should read James Joyce, or you should read Virginia Woolf, or you should read. And because of that, it didn't come with the kind of normal preconceptions that I think will come with if you read all of those books in an English class and someone's telling you this is great literature and this is part of what's known as the canon. I think with us, because everything was so mixed, it really was a kind of reading where we created our own canon. And obviously, English was not his first language. English is frankly his third language. So there was that also, that we, were able to come to it in these really kind of diffuse sort of, freewheeling ways. But then I think I also was always aware, because of my dad's class background, because, his literacy was also really tied to his class background, because he came from, obviously by the time my parents were married, we grew up in a working class family, but how he grew up was as an upper middle class kid in the Philippines, which is such a contrast to my mom, who grew up very much not that, very much rural poor. And so her relationship to literacy, her relationship to books is a lot more like she wouldn't read books. She has a much more kind of contentious or intimidated relationship with books and reading. Not just in English, which is also her third, I would even say fourth language, but, even in Tagalog, which is sort of considered to be the lingua franca of the Philippines, but it's not her first language. So I think that also complicates or inflected my relationship to books. As I know, mommy. That's my dog coming up. That I was aware that it was also, as much as it was a joy, not just a joy, but the thing that very literally saved me at countless moments in my life. It was also something that was political, also that was not divorced from questions of class or privilege, or because would I have become that kind of reader if my father hadn't grown up the way he'd grown up, hadn't had the kind of facility with reading Plato or reading all of those things. So for sure, yeah. I think because the book, so much of the book is really about understanding how my reading life was this inheritance and really this labor of love that came from him. It would have been impossible to talk about reading without talking about love and without talking about my love for him.
Wow. Well, that's beautiful. I'm sorry for your loss. There was something else I wanted to read, that you have a whole section on, all the anti-Asian violence going on. And you gave a bunch of examples, and you said, in 1984, when my mom was heavily pregnant, she was standing in line at a department store when an older woman violently shoved her to the ground. No one around helped. In Montreal in 2004, my aunt was once pushed by a young man into the way of a coming subway car, miraculously surviving by huddling between the rails just beneath the train rushing above her. When at 19, I lived on my own in Paris, I became afraid to leave my apartment because an older man who had seen me in a neighborhood cafe had begun stalking me, not to mention the nearly endless stream of woe I ni and ni hao ma from men that would greet me whenever I stepped foot outside. And you go on. And, you say there are major issues around how we critically analyze anti-Asian racism in both an American and a global context. It's clear that this kind of scapegoating is not new. Even in its latest Trumpian iteration, there are also a vast community of, well, anyway, you go on and on and on and on. But I wanted to not like that.
No, I got you.
You go on to write about this topic more, but I just wanted to highlight like all those experiences in your own personal life of people that you love and yourself, and how that affects just like the whole culture of your family, or like how you just tell me how you all how do you internalize that and be like, oh, okay, and now I'm just gonna like pop outside again,
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't really think that you do, or in the sense of, I think like most people who experience, frankly, just the PTSD of living in America. I think a lot of it is compartmentalizing. I think a lot of it, my family could win the Olympics for repression. So, and I think, and I absolutely would win the gold medal, and know that about myself. I was just joking to someone about the recent Persuasion adaptation, and obviously I'm not. I won't get into it because then we'll be here for 3 hours. But I was like, this is repressed person erasure. Like Anne Elliot is an Earth sign and we need repressed person representation. But so yes, I think that I think when I was writing this, all of the episodes that I'm talking about, when the accumulation of them, the accretion of their force when you write them in the paragraph, obviously, I was in researching all of that, I found the old sort of news clipping about my aunt, the one who had been pushed into the way of the subway car, and I was looking at her photo in this Canadian newspaper and the description of it, and just going, Jesus, it's one thing to have. I think many of us have family stories that then become legend, but then also their edges become worn down with time, just because you tell the story, or because survival requires you to wear those edges down. But faced with the material facts of it, sort of renews its horror for me. But I think because of that, because of my experience in France, which I talk about, having lived in France and having, Asian French friends who also experience the kind of, just rampant fetishizing, infantilizing, sexualizing that I think attends Asian women, not just in France, obviously, but here in America. That time was a formative time in my life, and I happened to be in France, but it's an experience that I know. In all of my group chats and all of my messages is shared by Asian women friends that I know, that grief and that rage and that terror, that all of that is real here, irrepressible. And at the same time, I think it's also important for me to talk about all of the places where Asian American or the Asian American politics and Asian American solidarity also fall short. Where are the places where, for example, it's a kind of an ongoing frustration of mine that there's often these lists of like Asian AAPI readers or AAPI writers you should read, or books you should read, and the lists are all Asian American, but there's no Pacific Islander sort of authors on that list. There's no books by Pacific Islanders or writers from Guam or Hawaii or Samoa or anything on those lists. And I was like, oh, okay, this is just false advertising. Or the ways where the ways that pull towards representation matters type of discourse can pull us towards the kind of idea, a regime of positive representation, or representation where the majority of the stories that we see do focus on, for example, middle class East Asian and South Asian families, and there is an illusion of the experiences of poor Southeast Asian communities, poor marginalized Southeast Asian or marginalized Asian communities, like Asian sex workers, Asian domestic laborers, the kinds of. It's an understatement to say that the Asian American community is not a monolith. It's both the what is it? I'm trying to remember. Numbers are not my strength, but the statistic that I talk about in that essay is talking about how it's. I think Asians rank per capita as the highest earning racial group in the States. That's not highest earning racial group of color. That's highest earning racial group, period. But at the same time, it's also the group that has the most disparity in terms of income, in terms of wealth. So even just talking about the class issues that are within Asian American community and that are so central to talking about when we talk about Asian American politics, even things like that, I think need to be discussed more. We need to have a sort of a wider and a thornier conversation about Asian American, the kind of Asian American politics that we're trying to produce in order to have Asian American solidarity.
Amazing. You should teach a class on this. I feel like, no, seriously, I feel like you're devoid of the podium that should be in front of you. No, really. You're like, it all comes out in fully formed sentences. You just go and there it is. It's perfect. It's a skill. That's a skill. When I come it. What advice would you have for aspiring authors, especially as such a big reader and somebody who has analyzed reading so much, reading in all its forms as you carefully lay out in the book?
It's funny, I think my old advice used to be like, oh yeah, read more, just read all the time. And now I think, it's going to become clear that I'm also like a contrarian. So if I say one thing or think I believe one thing, almost immediately I have to say or think the opposite or challenge myself to think the opposite. But I think recently I have been, even just for the aspiring author that I am, I've been telling myself that, or I've been feeling that it actually behooves me to not read less exactly, but the outcome will be that one reads less, but to read more slowly, because I think we all, especially nowadays, have this immense pressure to just keep up. There's this real if I'm not reading the thing that's in the zeitgeist, if I'm not, and I'm saying this as someone who literally has a book out, so I recognize that there's a self-defeating aspect to what I'm saying here, but that you can feel that reading can also become this kind of right to not feel FOMO because everyone else is talking about this thing. And I think I'm lucky in that sense because I think a lot of writers, especially if you're working on a novel, you're always I'm always 5 years behind just because, you read weird stuff to research whatever weird universe you're writing about anyway. But I do think reading slowly, reading weirdly, reading out of time, not necessarily always reading. This is the nightmare for contemporary publishing houses to be don't read the latest book. They're no, please read the latest book. But for us as citizens, for us as people and readers, I think it really benefits us. I started reading Edith Wharton recently, Age of Innocence. And then I'm texting people. I'm like, this is the best book that's ever been. Where have you been? Obviously it's the best. And then I think the flip side to that for aspiring authors is, and this is kind of a mean advice, but it's advice I'm turning towards myself, which is that I'm trying to read slower, but I'm trying to write faster. In the sense that I think the prevailing wisdom is the opposite, which is read more, but then also write and take your time and make everything perfect and really agonize over it. And I'm starting to be don't be afraid of it might be mediocre, fam. Just, or to have less kind of anxiety about whether or not is this perfect? Is everything? Because I think you can also, there's lots, I think there's enough mid stuff out there that why should you be afraid of not putting out something of God forbid you to put out something that's not perfect. So in a way I think sort of having a less precious relationship to
just try to write something bad.
Write something bad. Have fun with that. I think it can be really fun.
You can be pleasantly surprised if it's anything other than bad.
Honestly, exactly. If you're I'm going to write something really bad and then it's kind of okay.
It's not that bad.
And also, you're always your own worst critic because you might think it's bad. People are this is better than the majority of stuff out there, my girl. So
Yeah. Wow. Elaine, thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
I will take my Leo-ness and hit the road in this little month I have of I don't know.
Yes, happy Leo season to both of you. To you and my book.
Thank you. Your book and I will have a fabulous month together in the spotlight. Yay. So, Yeah.
Oh, it was so fun. Right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elaine. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.